I want to talk about how there are so many dentists that act like they're rich but are actually super broke. They're spending money as if they're making $500,000-$600,000 a year, but they're working at Aspen Dental, they're working for Heartland Dental, they're working as an associate, and they're only making $150,000 to $200,000 a year, and that's before paying taxes and before paying off student loans. If you just graduated from school and you're making $150,000 a year, you might think that's a lot of money, but if you have $400,000 in student loans and you're making $150,000 before paying taxes and before paying your student loan payment, you are not rich. So let's say you're making $150,000. Right off the bat, you're gonna have to pay $30,000 to $40,000 in taxes. If you have $400,000 in student loans and you're on a 10-year payment plan, that's $50,000 a year. You're gonna be spending another $5,000 to $6,000 on licensing fees, insurance, and other miscellaneous business expenses. Once you take all that into account, you might only be making $60,000 a year, which is $5,000 a month. Now, to be clear, there are a lot of people that live very good lives off of making $60,000 a year. I'm not saying that this makes you poor, but it definitely does not make you rich, at least not yet. If you're only keeping $5,000 or $6,000 a month, now is not the time to be buying a new house. It's not the time to be buying a new car. It's not the time to be going shopping. Now is the time to really evaluate your situation and get serious about your future. I'm going to show you how you can make $350,000 a year as a dentist, and then you'll have enough money to buy that house or that car or those new clothes that you've been wanting to buy. It's going to take some work, but it's really not that hard. It's just going to take a little bit of discipline for a few years to then set yourself up for a future of continued success. So here we go. Number one, live like you're poor for a few years. Just take a few years, forget trying to impress people. You don't need to live in a big house. You don't need to drive a new car. Your goal right now is not to come across to other people like you're rich. Your goal is not to promote how successful you are. Your goal is simply to spend the minimum amount of money you can while you're saving up some money. You are going to have the rest of your life to buy expensive and nice things for the next few years. Just for a few years. Stop buying things on Amazon. Stop going on expensive trips. Stop going out to eat every night. Cook some meals at home. It's going to save you some money. It's going to be healthier for you. Save what you can. If you can get your expenses under control and live like you're poor for just a few years, you are going to be setting yourself up with some incredible opportunities in the future. Once you figured out the expense thing, now it's time to start saving up an emergency fund. Before you even start thinking about doing anything else, you need to have $50,000 to $75,000 saved up in your bank. Ideally, that's going to be enough to cover 6 to 12 months if you lose your job or if you decide you want to buy a practice and change jobs and you need a little bit of padding, a little bit of security. When you have that money saved up, you're going to feel safer taking the types of risks that you're going to have to take in order to make it to a higher income level. If you go out and buy some big house and some new car and you have a mortgage and a car loan, you're all of a sudden going to have these bills each month that you have to pay. You do not want that right now. Right now, your goal is to live as cheap as you can and save up that initial emergency fund so that you're not in a position where you don't have the money to pay your bills. Don't spend any money on anything until you have $50,000 to $75,000 saved up in the bank. Now is not the time to be paying off your student loans. You want to pay the minimum you possibly can on your student loans until you have your emergency fund saved up. Depending upon when your loan servicer last required you to recertify your payments, if you put yourself on an income-based repayment plan, especially your first few years out of school, you could potentially have a $0 per month payment on your loans. Obviously, you are eventually going to have to pay your loans back, but you do not want to have to worry about that while you're making $150,000 working as an associate. Later, when you're making $350,000 to $400,000 a year as an owner, that's when you want to be paying your loans off. At this point, this is not the time to worry about your student loans or anything other than saving up that initial emergency fund. All right, so now once you've saved up that emergency fund, 6 to 12 months of expenses, ideally $50,000 to $75,000, now is the time to work on the income. Now is the time to increase your income. And the way that you do that as a dentist is you become a practice owner. Associate dentists make on average $200,000 a year, while practice owners make on average $350,000 a year. That's an extra $150,000 a year. There's a reason that the majority of the corporate offices like Heartland, Aspen, and Pacific are run by new grad dentists who are fresh out of school. The reason is because after these dentists work for these corporations for a year or two, they realize that they can go and they can become practice owners and do the same amount of work but make substantially more money. And so you'll actually see most dentists who are 45, 50, 55 years old, they're almost all owners. They're not going to go work for some corporation because by that time in their lives, they've realized they can make so much more money as an owner. Why would they want to be working for one of these large group practices? Don't wait until you're 45, 50, 55 to figure that out. Figure it out right now. Work for a year or two, save up some money, build up that emergency fund, but it's time to just buy a practice. Don't wait until you're older to learn the lessons that other people have learned before you. Take their advice and understand you can be making substantially more money as an owner, so go ahead and get started on becoming a practice owner. I have a bunch of other videos and podcast episodes that talk about how to find a dental practice for sale and how to buy a practice. Make sure to check those out. But for the purposes of today, just know that you can make a lot more money if you are the owner of the business rather than working for someone else. All right, so number 4, once you become the owner of a practice, now it's time to make sure that you grow your income to $300,000 to $400,000 a year. As a practice owner, this is a very realistic number for you to hit. The average is somewhere around 350. So you can be making good money as a practice owner. So let's do some math. The average practice is going to have an overhead between 50 and 75%. This means that you're going to be able to keep somewhere between 50 to 25% of all the work that is being done in the office. So for this example, let's say you have an overhead of 60%. So in order to make $350,000 at a 60% overhead, your office needs to produce $875,000 a year. That's really not that high of a number for a dental office. Assuming you're working 48 weeks per year and 4 days per week, that comes out to about $4,500 a day. Assuming you have a full hygiene schedule, hygiene is going to be producing something like $1,500 per day. So that leaves you with just $3,000 in production per day. It is not hard to produce $3,000 a day. That's like 2 crowns and 3 or 4 fillings and you're done. You don't even have to be doing endo or any crazy surgical extractions or implants or Invisalign if you don't want to. Now, if you do those things, it's gonna help, but you don't have to do those types of things to make $350,000 a year. As long as your practice is set up correctly, making $300,000 to $400,000 a year as a dentist is not a hard thing to do. By far, the number one easiest way to get yourself in a situation where you're able to be making this kind of money is going to be buying a practice that is already producing these types of numbers. If you can find a practice that is producing around $800,000 a year, if you buy it and you step in and just replicate what the previous dentist was doing, you are going to be able to be making $300,000 to $400,000 a year. It's that simple. Now, if you try to do a startup and you don't have enough patients starting out, you're not going to be able to make that much money. If you buy a practice that's substantially smaller and you don't have a concrete plan in order to grow that practice to be $800,000 to $900,000 a year in production, then you're also not going to be able to hit that number. With that being said, maybe money isn't the most important thing to you. Maybe you're happy making $150,000 a year for a little while because you're buying a practice for lifestyle purposes. Maybe you're buying a practice that's only open 3 days a week. You're all right with the fact that you're going to be making a little bit less than you would if you were working 4 days a week, but you're fine with that because you have some other interest that you're interested in. That's completely fine. You just want to make sure that you're making enough money to cover all of your expenses and also have some money left over for investing and saving for retirement. All right, so finally, you have lived the last few years like you're poor. Maybe you're keeping your expenses down to $50,000 a year. You've saved up an emergency fund. You've bought a practice and you've grown that practice to a point where you're now producing $800,000 a year and keeping 60% of that. Now is finally the time where you can buy a house, where you can start more aggressively paying off your student loans, when you can maybe buy a new car and start to spend money on some more things that make you happy. If you've gotten used to living off of $70,000 a year and now you're making $350,000 a year, you are going to be able to dramatically increase the quality of your lifestyle while still having plenty of money saved up after buying the things that you want to buy. If you're making $350,000 a year, that's $29,000 per month. With $29,000 a month, you can easily now afford a $4,000 to $5,000 a month mortgage. You can afford your $5,000 to $6,000 a month student loan payments and still have some money left over to go on a vacation as well as save for retirement. But the key here was that you figured out the income piece of the equation before you let your lifestyle get out of hand. The risk and what you don't want to happen is that while you are working as an associate or working as an employee, that you start to let your lifestyle inflate and get out of hand to the point that you are no longer able to take a few months off from work in order to pursue buying a practice because you have let your lifestyle take over your life. If you can figure out a way to keep your expenses as low as possible while you're working on building up your income, you are going to be so much better off into the future. It is still very possible to be enormously successful as a dentist. The key is just learning how to control your expenses until you are able to start making the types of money that you can be making as a practice owner.